Coming up on Network Africa, Director General of the World Trade Organization says major steps on COVID vaccine patent waiver plan. Mozambique death toll from Cyclone Gumbay rises to 48 plus. US sanctions more Somali leaders over delayed polls. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. The Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, says negotiators have made a major step towards a deal on waiving patents for coronavirus vaccines. India and South Africa argue that waiving vaccine manufacturers' intellectual property rights will boost production and get more jabs to poorer countries. They've agreed with the US and the EU on the agreement's key elements, but some details need to be fleshed out and all WTO members need to back it. Pharmaceutical firms have, however, criticized the process, saying that weakening patents when supply constraints had eased is a mistake. Meanwhile, the Director General of the World Health Organization says reported cases of COVID-19 are once again increasing globally after several weeks of declines, stressing that the pandemic is not over. Speaking at a press conference in Geneva, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus said the increase is occurring despite reduction in testing in some countries, which means the cases seen are just the tip of the iceberg.
Weeks of declines, reported cases of COVID-19 are once again increasing globally, especially in parts of Asia. These increases are occurring despite reductions in testing in some countries, which means the cases we're seeing are just the tip of the iceberg. And we know that when cases increase, so do deaths. Continued local outbreaks and surges are to be expected, particularly in areas where measures to prevent transmission have been lifted. However, there are unacceptably high levels of mortality in many countries, especially where vaccination levels are low among susceptible populations. Each country is facing a different situation with different challenges. But the pandemic is not over. I repeat, the pandemic is not over. We call on all countries to remain vigilant, continue to vaccinate, test, sequence, provide early care for patients, and apply common sense public health measures to protect health workers and the public.
Dr. Oluwaseun Akinyemi is a consultant public health physician at the University College Hospital, Ibadan. He joins us on the program for more on the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
So attention seems to have drifted from the COVID-19 pandemic to other issues, like the conflict in Ukraine. We just heard there the WHO chief saying the pandemic is not over. Can we ever get to that point, or we just have to learn to live with COVID?
Yeah, but I know that globally fatigue is setting in. So many countries are relaxing measures to especially non-pharmacological measures, the face mask and all. But as the WHO Director General said, the pandemic is not over. We still must continue. And the key word here is continuing vigilance. We must continue vigilant. And our decisions must be evidence-based. We must keep track of the cases and the new cases especially. And then we must keep up with immunization. Immunization is very, very critical. If we are going to deal with this pandemic. I know it's the world over, people are getting tired, we are getting fatigued, but we must keep up the measures that we have been using, especially non-pharmacological measures, if we are to keep COVID at bay. With time, when we reach herd immunity, things will get, but we are not near herd immunity yet, especially in Africa, where the vaccination rate is still very, very low. So this is not the time to lower our guard. Yet we can catch our breath, because whether we like it or not, fatigue is setting in, but we must not let our guard totally.
You know, first it was Western countries relaxing restrictions, and then, you know, Africa is now following in some ways. Yesterday, Namibia announced an end to compulsory mask wearing and PCR testing. I mean, do you feel this is too soon, considering just a small population of people in Africa have been vaccinated? I mean, what should African leaders be doing now instead of relaxing measures?
Yeah, as I said earlier, fatigue is setting in. Even in developed countries, measures are being relaxed, but we cannot compare many African countries with developing countries in terms of vaccine coverage. So it might be too premature to say, let's relax this measure, because even when the measures are in place anyway, they were still difficult to enforce in many African countries. And because the vaccination rate is still low, what we should be doing now is to ensure that we wrap up our effort, we ensure that vaccination increases so that we get as close as possible to herd immunity, and so that the very few people that may remain unvaccinated will be protected by the many other people who are vaccinated. This is not the time to let down our guard. We should invest more in local production of vaccine. We should continue to educate our people to keep up. I mean, it's a good thing. We can make it our lifestyle, continue hand washing, social distancing, and all. But this is not the time to totally let down our guard, especially in African countries.
And Doctor, of course, the threat of new variants still persists. How can we prepare for future waves in this case?
Yeah. The evidence that we have presently says that to prevent further emergence of other variants, we must keep up with vaccination. So the answer to preventing future variants from emerging is that we must increase vaccination, and vaccination. So that is the answer. We must ensure that we get to that herd immunity where most people, almost all the people, are vaccinated. And that is the answer. And we must continue all other measures, non-pharmacological measures of face mask use, hand washing. I understand the issue of pandemic fatigue, but we must not totally lay down our guard. We must keep up, especially with vaccination. That is the answer to preventing emergence of future variants.
An important message there, get vaccinated. Dr. Oluwaseun Akinyemi, consultant public health physician at University College Hospital, Ibadan. Thank you so much for your thoughts on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And still on health matters, the World Health Organization is warning against the destruction of health facilities during conflicts all over the world. Citing countries like Ethiopia, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus says this destruction hampers efforts to help victims of the Tigray crisis. According to the WHO, 6 million people in Tigray have been under blockade by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces for almost 500 days, sealed off from the outside world.
In Ethiopia, 6 million people in Tigray have been under blockade by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces for almost 500 days, sealed off from the outside world. There is almost no fuel, no cash, and no communications. No food aid has been delivered since the middle of December. 83% of the population is food insecure. Our partners are running out of what little food they have and the fuel to transport it. About 3/4 of health facilities assessed by WHO have been damaged or destroyed. People are dying. There is no treatment for 46,000 people who need treatment for HIV. And the program has been abandoned. People with tuberculosis, hypertension, diabetes, and cancer are also not being treated and may have died. As a result of the lack of fuel, some of our partners are having to scale back their operations. The situation in Tigray is catastrophic. The blockade on communications, including on journalists being able to report from Tigray, means it remains a forgotten crisis, out of sight and out of mind.
We're only very short part into this year, and we have never seen, globally, never seen this rate of attacks on healthcare. Health is becoming a target in these situations. It's becoming part of the strategy and tactics of war. It is entirely unacceptable. It is against international humanitarian law, and in fact, under international humanitarian law, conflicting parties are actually instructed to specifically take measures to avoid attacking or inadvertently destroying or hurting health workers or a health facility. They don't bear a responsibility not just to not attack. They actually bear a responsibility to ensure that they don't attack, to identify those facilities, to deconflict those facilities, and to ensure that they do not, as part of their prosecution of war, attack those facilities.
Into politics now, the U.S. has increased the number of Somali officials under visa restrictions for undermining the country's democratic process. This comes after Somalia again missed a March 15 deadline for completing parliamentary elections that have been delayed for more than a year. The U.S. Embassy in Somalia lauded the states of Southwest and Gumbay for concluding their parliamentary elections before the deadline and expressed disappointment over the delays by other states. The U.S. says it will use visa restrictions and other tools to promote accountability and support the conclusion of the electoral process. However, the names of the officials have not been released yet. The election deadline has now been extended to the end of the month to allow the remaining seats in the lower house to be filled. The executive in Libya is said to be facing a crisis which, if left unresolved, could lead to instability and parallel governments in the country. This is according to UN Chief of Political Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, who spoke to the Security Council, adding that the UN is exerting significant efforts to resolve the crisis. She says that since her last briefing to the Council on January the 24th, there's been several substantial developments in the country.
The Libyan executive is facing a crisis that could, if left unresolved, lead to instability and parallel governments in the country. The United Nations is exerting significant efforts to resolve this crisis. We aim to bring together Libyan stakeholders to agree on a constitutional basis for the holding of elections as soon as possible. Our priority is to focus on fulfilling the aspirations of the more than 2.8 million Libyans who have registered to vote. They should be able to choose their leaders through credible, transparent, and inclusive elections according to an agreed-upon constitutional and legal framework. The human rights situation in Libya remains deeply worrying. UNSMIL observed an increase in hate speech, defamation, and threats, as well as incitement to violence and acts of violence against activists, journalists, and political actors, including women. State and non-state actors continued to arbitrarily arrest and detain human rights activists. In eastern Libya in particular, national security laws were often arbitrarily applied. Meanwhile, a lack of due process and fair trial standards marred proceedings in military courts.
This also come on the program. South African president officially recognizes Prince Zulu as Zulu King. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. The death toll from Cyclone Gumbay in Mozambique has risen to 48, with the only access roads to the worst-hit area damaged. Cyclone Gumbay has affected tens of thousands of people since making landfall last week. At least 3,000 homes have been destroyed. According to the authorities, Musuril area in the northern province of Nampula is the worst affected area, with 31 reported deaths. The area is still isolated after roads and phone services were damaged. The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has recognized Prince Misuzulu Zulu as the official Zulu King. He has not yet been crowned because of tensions in the royal family, but this nod means that the king-elect is one big step closer to officially taking the throne. Traditional leaders are elected based on age-old customs in South Africa, but the person chosen as king has to be recognized by a president to be accepted as valid. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says the global supply gap resulting from the conflict in Ukraine could push up international food and feed prices by 8 to 22% above their already elevated levels. Globally, if the conflict results in a sudden and prolonged reduction in food exports by Ukraine and Russia, it could exert additional upward pressure on international food commodity prices. FAO simulations suggest that under such a scenario, the global number of undernourished people could increase by 8 to 13 million people in 2022 to 2023, with the most pronounced increases taking place in Asia-Pacific, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa and the Near East and North Africa.
So already prior to the crisis, the international food prices reached an all-time high. So in February 2022, the FAO price index reached a new historical record, 21% above its level a year earlier and 2.2% higher than its previous peak of February 2011, which means that we start the conflict with a significant level of high prices already. In 2021, wheat exports by the Russian Federation and Ukraine accounted for 30% of the global market. Nearly 50 countries depend on the Russian Federation and Ukraine for at least 30% of the wheat import needs. Of these 26 countries, over 50% on the wheat imports from these two countries. For fertilizers, 25 countries rely on the Russian Federation with an import dependency of 30% or more for the N, P, and K fertilizer. Wheat is a staple food for 35% of the world population. The lack of substitute is likely to compound the pressure on wheat prices.
Well, the Russian embassy in Kenya has blamed Western sanctions for the rising cost of living in the East African nation. This is after Kenya's presidential spokesperson, Kanze Dena, blamed Russia's invasion of Ukraine for the soaring fuel and food prices in the country. In an interview, she had said the rising cost of living is not exclusive to Kenya. While Russia says the real cause of the increase in prices in Africa is not Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, but what Moscow describes as the illegal unilateral sanctions imposed by the US, EU, and their allies on Russia. Parliamentarians in Kenya are proposing amending the country's forest law to make it easier to change the borders of protected areas. Well, this is a move activists warn could negatively affect wildlife and the environment in the East African country.
Center of the debate around the Forest Conservation and Management Amendment, now under review by Parliamentary Committee in Kenya, are discussing on forests around the rapidly developing capital of Nairobi. The amendment will weaken the power of Kenya's Forest Service to veto proposed boundary changes that will endanger rare species or water catchment areas.
It gives the powers now to the parliamentarians to decide what portion of the forest they can give out or the boundaries they want to change without even asking anybody, just by themselves.
But supporters of the amendment argue that changing the law protects people already settled on disputed forest.
So that's the powers they want to usurp from section of 34, section 2, which says that if you need to change boundaries or you want part of the forest for any development or for any other purposes, you take that amendment to the committee and then KFS is called to bring its technical knowledge and say, yes, we agree, it's not going to affect environment, it's not going to affect wildlife, it's not going to affect the community, it is not going to affect the cultural and other indigenous things. Yes, we can allow that part of forest to be used for that purpose.
Muriti does not think they will return, but hopes to protect what's left. He heads a community forest association that patrols the forest, replaces invasive trees with indigenous ones, and works with officials to prosecute loggers. It's dangerous. When he investigated illegal logging, Muriti said a body was dumped in the forest and he was warned he could be next. He then fled to Uganda. In 2020, activist Joanna Stutchbury, who worked to protect a Nairobi area forest from encroachment, was killed. Last month, Kenya's Senate said someone trying to land grab may have killed her. African Development Bank says Kenya lost about half of its forest cover between 1980 and 2000, and it lost another 11% in the subsequent 2 decades.
And our Tunisian women have launched the Bee Treasures Initiative, a startup that is expected to boost the agricultural sector of the country. It also aims to help other women who wish to learn the profession and launch their own projects. Take a look.
These are Tunisia's queen bees, ecological beekeepers who are also helping other women break into the field. Miriam Cherney quit her job in the oil sector to open a small ecological bee farm in 2016. She then founded the Bee Treasures Initiative. It aims to bring marginalized and disadvantaged women together in the field of beekeeping and help them launch their businesses.
One of the prominent problems that I faced when I started my project was financing, because I'm a female farmer, still in my beginnings, and I do not own a land. So it was difficult to obtain money. I had to rely on myself. The second thing that was difficult for me was dealing with the fellow men in the field. I wasn't taken seriously, and many of them laughed and said I was a woman. What can I do? How am I going to carry heavy things? You know, how am I going to move the cells at night or go to the mountains? And the same ones who laughed at me then are now calling me for advice. And these are among the things that I'm proud of.
Sahad Mohammed is a Tunisian agricultural engineer and activist. She says just 4% of women own agricultural businesses or land in the country.
The small percentage of women who own agricultural projects is due to the fact that women do not own the land. People do not rent their land out to women. And secondly, in our culture, women's inheritance is half that of the man. And even if she takes her inheritance, she does not inherit the land. She does not inherit the olive trees, and she does not inherit the agricultural land.
For Faiza Hamdao, she encourages women to take part in agriculture.
We've established this initiative to help women in order to encourage them to become decision makers and to be able to start an agricultural project and succeed in it. Just because they are women, that doesn't mean they must stay at home. No, they can have successful businesses.
Cherney and her team hope their initiative can help more women gain access to the lands they need to start their own business ventures.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shaboale. Bye for now.